With all the very latest from around the world and here at home, it's the ITV News at 10.
It is a tragedy unfolding in a quiet way every day in ordinary neighbourhoods up and down the country. And its cause is simple. There are not enough houses and rents are rising too high. And so families are just one after another being turned out onto the streets with nowhere else to go.
I feel like we've been treated as criminals.
Your world's just fallen apart.
Women like Carol and her family, and Charlotte, her husband, and 3 children.
I've got 6 weeks to leave, or they'll apply for the bailiffs. I have nowhere to go. I can't believe that this is happening. I don't know what I'm going to do.
Most people probably wouldn't begrudge homeowners wanting their properties back to sell, but the terrible truth is that the evictions are dramatically on the rise and the people being turned out have nowhere else to go. Also on News at 10 tonight. Will the Prime Minister sack her? Downing Street admits the Prime Minister did not sanction the Home Secretary's latest controversial comments. Tragedy upon tragedy, what the fate of one extended family tells us about Gaza's agony. At risk, the treasures that could be lost to the nation.
You came into my life like a hurricane.
And Mission Distinctly Possible, how the actors' strike led to Simon Pegg working with Rick Astley.
I Instagrammed a little picture of Rick just saying, "This guy with a love heart." And then I think Rick saw that and
I fell in love.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. Over the past year and more, our investigations correspondent Danielle Hewitt has been telling a clear story about housing in this country. It has been absolutely heartrending at times, an unfolding tragedy of ordinary people caught up in extraordinary circumstances through no fault of their own. It began with a series of reports about the dire state of much of our social housing, including some places that frankly weren't fit for rats. But as he has grappled with the enormity of the overall shortage of housing, Dan has found himself dealing day after day with people who may be working but find themselves turned out of their private rented flats and houses onto the street with absolutely nowhere else to go. The number of Section 21 notices being issued is rising dramatically. Forced, no-fault evictions. Perhaps fair enough in normal times if a landlord wants to sell, but in a world where there is nowhere else to go, these evictions are inflicting a visceral terror on thousands of families.
On this quiet, suburban estate, one family's life is about to be turned upside down.
You think that this is a dream. This can't be happening.
What time are they due to come? 10 o'clock?
Yeah.
It's the day Carol has been dreading. The day her home of nearly a decade that she shares with her daughter and 2 young grandchildren is taken away as she waits for the bailiffs to arrive.
And it's been through no fault of our own. You know, we're just a little family trying to get by.
As she takes out their belongings, a few yards away, the bailiffs have pulled up, ready to move in. Carol and her family are being evicted using Section 21. It is a no-fault eviction notice. The landlord says he needs to sell the house, and despite both working, Carol and her daughter can't find anywhere else affordable to rent and will be homeless in a matter of minutes.
My life cover will look after my family.
Okay.
I do wake up in the mornings and think, oh God, I wish I could have died in my sleep. I know obviously it's not a nice thing to say for my daughter and my grandchildren with me not being here, but at least they'll be able to get back on the ladder.
It's 10 o'clock on the dot and the bailiffs enter the house. They don't knock, they just walk in. By court order, it's now theirs to take.
You all right? Are you already packed and everything ready to go? Is it arrears or is it...
No.
Is it not?
No. Through no fault of our own.
With quiet but brutal efficiency, they are asked to leave.
All right, have a good day.
The eviction complete, the locksmith immediately makes sure they can't return. As the reality sinks in for Carol and her daughter. Tell me what you're thinking right now.
I feel like we've been treated as criminals. Your world's just fallen apart.
As they try to call the council's homelessness department, the family have no idea where or even if they'll have a place to stay for tonight. What we've witnessed here this morning is happening across the country. Court-ordered bailiffs being sent to people's homes to evict them, with nothing that tenants can do to resist, and in many cases, nowhere for them to go afterwards. In Luton, it's a fate Charlotte is fighting for the sake of her 3 children.
This is all of my documentations that I've gotten together.
After getting the kids ready for school, she's going to court to challenge the Section 21 no-fault eviction notice they've received.
I'm defending myself. I couldn't afford a solicitor, and because my husband works, I didn't qualify for legal aid either.
Her and her husband have privately rented this home for 10 years, but the landlord says they want to sell the property.
For the Section 21 to be allowed for you to have 2 months to pick up your whole family and your home and your children and everything they've ever known and just move on is completely impossible. Don't get me wrong, I'm getting on breakfast, big smile, let's get all to school, but inside, it's another story, I'm petrified.
Charlotte and her husband have searched and searched.
Right, okay boys, we ready?
But can't find anywhere else affordable. She hopes today she can make her case to stay until they find somewhere to avoid becoming homeless. Later that day, we meet up with Charlotte outside court. It's not the news she wanted.
I've got 6 weeks to leave, or they'll apply for the bailiffs. I have nowhere to go. My children, my husband. We've private rented our whole lives. I can't believe that this is happening. I don't know what I'm going to do.
In England's creaking courts and broken housing system, it is those with the least who are suffering the most.
For Carol and for Charlotte, things could hardly get any worse, and we'll hear more from Dan in just a moment. But it looks like the housing crisis will only grow. Joel, mixing my words there. But listen, can I ask actually both of you, now you're here, to just paint a bit of a picture of this, just to clarify it. People are falling behind on mortgages. This is a problem that seems set to grow.
Yeah, look, there's what they're going through at the moment, both of them, is horrific. And they're at the rough end of really rough justice, which this massively dysfunctional market is meting out. Both Carol and Charlotte have been evicted by landlords that say they want to sell the house, Tom. There's quite good evidence, actually, that that's happening to an increasing extent. I was speaking to an auctioneer earlier down in Southend who said that his auction's flooded now with private landlords who are selling up. They're getting out of the market. There are 2 reasons why they may well be doing this. One is because the government abolished a tax break for landlords, which was pretty lucrative just recently. And secondly, is interest rates. Interest rates have risen extremely fast in the last couple of years. It's put enormous pressure on homeowners. We know that more and more homeowners are falling into arrears. We know that private landlords are too. The number of landlords struggling to make mortgage repayments has soared by 30%. They've fallen into arrears in the last 3 months. 1 in 5 people in the UK live in private rented accommodation. There are 2 million buy-to-let mortgages. Landlords are increasingly struggling. This has the potential to affect an enormous number of people.
And that explains why we're seeing this jump, 38%, in the number of Section 21 no-fault evictions being handed out by landlords, either selling up or because they can up their rent. What it doesn't explain, though, is why we're seeing this rise in bailiff possessions of 28%. Why would a tenant go all the way to court, drag it out for months and months, knowing they'll lose? The law's not on their side here. facing bailiffs to come to their door. Well, they'll do it because they've got no other choice. They've got nowhere else to go. They can't afford to rent privately because rents are far too high. They go to the council, and the council advise them to stay put for as long as possible. Stay until the bailiffs come, because they haven't got any homes to give them either. The government says it's going to ban Section 21 no-fault evictions, but only once it's reformed the courts. But court reform doesn't solve the ultimate problem here: not enough houses. Both Carol and Charlotte would have found someone else to rent if they could, but they can't, and that's why they're in this situation.
OK, both of you, thank you very much indeed. And now let's move on to the work of our government. And you may not be incredibly surprised to hear that the Home Secretary made some comments today that split her party once again. Yes, she did. Downing Street let it be known that it had tried and failed to make changes to Mrs Braverman's article in this morning's Times. In it, she accused London's Metropolitan Police of showing favouritism towards pro-Palestinian protesters.
This began as a row about timing. Rishi Sunak said it was provocative and disrespectful for a pro-Palestine march to take place on Armistice Day, when Britain will remember its veterans. Free Palestine! But he accepted the decision of Met Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley not to ban this Saturday's protest. Then Home Secretary Suella Braverman took a different turn. In a controversial article in The Times, she accused senior police officers of playing favourites when it came to protesters. Right-wing and nationalist protesters who engage in aggression are rightly met with a stern response, yet pro-Palestinian mobs displaying almost identical behaviour are largely ignored, even when clearly breaking the law, she wrote. Ms Braverman said she did not resile from her description of hate marchers, comparing them to sectarian protesters in Northern Ireland. Comments that shocked the police.
I think a lot of officers will feel very unsettled by this, will feel unappreciated, unsupported.
And Parliament.
She is deliberately inflaming community tensions in the most dangerous of ways. She is encouraging extremists on all sides, attacking the police when she should be backing them.
This minister said he would respond as the Home Secretary was in hospital with a close family member.
I've been contacted this morning by members of the Jewish community who are deeply uneasy about what this weekend will bring. It is reasonable for politicians, the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary and others, I'm sure some on the other side of the House as well, to raise those concerns and make sure that the police are protecting those communities.
At the start of the day, there were claims that Rishi Sunak had given his approval to Suella Braverman's article. But then Downing Street said he had not. I understand that she had been asked to edit significant parts of it. But while Rishi Sunak considers his Home Secretary's fate, he knows that punishing her could upset some MPs on his backbenches. One MP on the right of the party said it was Sir Mark Rowley in the wrong. She's just saying what the public think, that the protest should not happen, he said. But others are furious. We need a reset. I say Rishi should roll the dice and sack her, said one. Another, a minister, responded they were in public, probably not the best place to give you my view of the Home Secretary. The march itself from Hyde Park to the US Embassy does not pass the cenotaph, and the man putting on the memorial event does not object to it going ahead.
As a democratic organisation, we believe fundamentally in the right of people to protest. That's what the First and Second World War generations fought for. So, yes, it should be able to go ahead, but our concern would be that if it impacted on Remembrance Day. You know, Remembrance Day is hardwired into the British national psyche.
He thanked the PM and Met Police Chief for walking a difficult line and said the Home Secretary had not helped them with this intervention ahead of Remembrance Day.
And Anushka is here to talk about all this. I mean, honestly, it feels at this point like discipline is completely breaking down within the party. Fair or unfair?
Well, I think it's a very difficult night for Rishi Sunak as he decides what to do, and it will feel to him that she has overstepped the mark, absolutely, for sure. There is fury on the Liberal wing of the party. I mean, you heard some of the things I said MPs have been saying to me. They felt that the King's speech was a bit flat. They need a reset. They think that he should sack her. You know, from conversations I've had, the Chief Whip, Simon Hart, who's in charge of discipline, is inundated with people saying they are furious with Suella Braverman. But the challenge for Rishi Sunak is that her stock has sort of been rising on the right of the party. You know, those Conservative home polls of Tory members. She went from being at the bottom of the list to 4th from the top. There are many who want her to be a future leader. And to some extent, she was saying stuff on migration that the Prime Minister might not echo, but it was quite useful for him to have her saying it. But on this occasion, I think there is real anger with how far it's gone. And the talk now in Westminster is a reshuffle going to be brought forward? And in that reshuffle, could she be the highest profile casualty? I mean, the rumour doing the rounds, but I promise it is a rumour, is that Michael Gove could replace her and that Jeremy Hunt is safe. But I tell you what, that would send fury to another wing of the party.
That's it. Best rumour ever. It just proves if you stand still long enough in politics, Michael Gove always ends up in every job. Anyway, that's a longer conversation for a different time, but thank you very much. Indeed, now the international pressure piled on Israel to allow some kind of halt, any kind of halt in its attacks in Gaza has persuaded it to allow some pauses. They'll happen every day for 4 hours, allowing aid in and civilians out. In the meantime, though, airstrikes continue to claim more Palestinian lives.
After the call for survivors, the pause for a response. The sound of smashed concrete, then silence. Airstrikes destroyed these buildings this morning. Some of those killed and injured were young. Across Gaza, the death toll is said to be 10,000, but even Israel's closest ally conceded today the number may well be even higher.
I have 2 children and my wife, 2 families and one with 2 children. My mother, my father, my sister, and my sister who has 2 children.
The IDF released footage it said showed humanitarian aid heading into Gaza, and as it did, it was announced that Israel will begin to implement pauses in the fighting each day, 4 hours long in northern Gaza. It's the potential release of some of the more than 200 hostages in Gaza, which offers the greatest hope for a longer pause in the fighting. ITV News has confirmed that it's progress in those negotiations which brought the head of Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, the director of the CIA, the American agency, and the Prime Minister of Qatar together in Doha earlier today. We understand that one issue discussed was whether fuel could be brought into the Strip for humanitarian purposes in exchange for the release of some hostages. But that would require the agreement of all sides.
If today there is talk of a hostage release, it's only because the pressure is up and Hamas can feel the pain.
Do you accept that with every civilian casualty now in Gaza, the support that Israel might have enjoyed is eroding?
No one in Gaza can stand up in front of an ITV camera and say, oh, this is all Hamas's fault. And why did Hamas start this war? And why are Hamas living in bunkers protected under the ground while the civilians above are suffering?
But in terms of a long-term ceasefire, tonight the US president ruled that out.
What are the chances of a Gaza ceasefire? None. No possibility. Any update on getting hostages out? We're still optimistic.
Tonight, one of the armed factions in Gaza released a video which appeared to show 2 of the hostages addressing the camera directly, a woman in her 70s and a teenage boy complaining about their need for food, for water and for medicine. Messages no doubt intended by their captors to influence the hostage negotiations. Rohit Katru, News at 10, Tel Aviv.
Well, it was actually the White House that announced the 4-hour pauses in the fighting, and Dan is in Washington tonight. Dan, the US are still pushing for longer pauses, but days really rather than hours.
Yeah, I mean, they have been consistently trying to get this achieved for days, if not weeks, really, since the conflict began. And there is a degree of frustration. This morning, President Biden gave voice to that frustration, saying it's taken a little longer than I had hoped. The State Department spokesman who I spoke to today also talked about this being the result of really some very delicate high-level diplomacy that you kind of heard in Rohit's report there, but hoping that this will now enable civilians to escape the worst of the fighting.
This is something, of course, that we welcome. It's the outcome and result of numerous high-level conversations between President Biden to his counterpart in the Israeli government. Secretary Blinken just finished a trip to the region where he also raised the importance of humanitarian pauses. We think it's absolutely necessary to ensure that Israel is doing everything it can to ensure that civilians are protected.
This also, they're hoping, will give the space potentially for the passage of more hostages to be released if that can be negotiated. The National Security Council spokesman John Kirby today said these were good steps in the right direction. As well as that, they're hoping to build on the aid as well. They said yesterday more than 100 trucks crossed from Rafah. Well, they're hoping to get that up to about 150 each day. But in terms of talk of a sort of more permanent ceasefire, that appears to be off the table. That's being described as not appropriate and would, quote, legitimise what Hamas did on October the 7th.
OK, Dan, thank you very much indeed. Now, in the absence of a meaningful ceasefire, more precious lives will be lost, like that of Maysera Al-Reyes. He was a young Palestinian doctor, so impressive that he got a British Foreign Office scholarship, honing skills here to take back there. This week, an Israeli airstrike destroyed his parents' home, killing them, him and his sisters. When his brothers began digging for his body, a second missile hit, killing them as well.
The rescue team is equipped with no more than bare hands and a sense of urgency. There are survivors, but broken bodies also lie in the ruins. 2 young men have been killed. They had come to retrieve the body of their brother, already buried under this rubble, when witnesses say a second Israeli missile struck. His name is Maysera Al-Reyes, one of the brightest and best of his generation, who won a prestigious scholarship to study in the UK.
We are medical students at Al-Azhar.
A young doctor dedicated to saving lives, now lying dead, alongside his mother and father, sisters and brothers, nephews and nieces in Gaza, including everyone in this family photograph.
We couldn't comprehend that he would be lost. Or even to imagine that he could be murdered in that way.
Hala has known him for 9 years. Last week he sent a message. It seems to foretell his own death.
My feeling of fear is escalating. I imagine myself underneath the rubble, and I feel terrified to stay alive underneath the rubble.
Maysera was among a group of exceptional talents chosen to meet the Foreign Secretary just a few weeks ago in Jerusalem. We asked him for his response.
How can the death of a man like this, a man who was dedicated to doing good, be justified?
Well, every loss of life is heartbreaking, and that is true of Palestinians as well as Israelis. And that is why we are so focused on getting humanitarian aid into Gaza.
But that's not enough for Maysera's friends.
It's a televised genocide in front of everyone, but no one is moving. No one is stopping the Israeli occupation.
Maysera longed to be part of a Palestinian future, a future of peace and freedom, a future that seems further away than ever. John Ray, News at 10.
13 days of agony for Liverpool's Colombian footballer Luis Diaz over the kidnapping of his father is over. He has been freed. Luis Manuel Diaz is in the brown shirt in the centre of the picture. He'd been held by anti-government fighters in Colombia. Mr. Diaz's release was arranged with the help of the Roman Catholic Church. At first glance, they may not seem like they have very much in common. The Great White Horse Hotel in Ipswich, which inspired Charles Dickens's novel The Pickwick Papers, St Mary's Church in Stoke by Nayland in Suffolk, painted by Constable, and Holbeck House near Dudley in the West Midlands. All are at risk, though, of being lost forever. They have been added to Historic England's at-risk register. But in some places, like Holme Firth in West Yorkshire, familiar to Last of the Summer Wine fans, is one of those coming off the list.
From the windmill whose sails have stopped, to the manor of the man who made sewing machines, and a 15th century barn in need of a new roof. These buildings have all been added to a register of historic sites deemed at risk of ruin.
It's certainly not a task for somebody who's in it for the short haul to sort out woodworm, dry rot, wet rot and anything else you can think of.
Buildings like this Grade 2 listed chapel are added to the register if they're deemed at risk of neglect, decay or inappropriate development. But in Middleton, near Rochdale, it's not just one building at risk, but an entire conservation area.
So this is the oldest mill in Middleton.
Some of these buildings are in a really bad state. Are they really worth saving?
These buildings and these places mean so much to people, they mean so much to communities. They tell the story of how places are developed, and you really can't put a price on that.
159 sites have been added to the Historic England at Risk register. 44 are buildings and structures, 53 are places of worship. There are 55 archaeological sites, 3 parks and 4 conservation areas. But it's not all bad news, as 203 places have been rescued. When the cameras stopped rolling in the Yorkshire town of Holme Firth, Last of the Summer Wine's former home fell into decline, and it's taken years of conservation work to restore it.
If we didn't protect them, they'd just die, wouldn't they, you know, without people like us doing what we do.
In Salford, a church ravaged by fire in 2017 has also risen from the ashes and been removed from the at-risk register.
Everybody thought it's going to be lost, and this was very, very significant church serving the community for the last 150 years.
And in South London, a shop which spent a century selling sausages is now dishing up Chinese food from the same historic shopfront. Proof that places from our past can find new purpose in the future. Amy Welch, News at 10.
Finally, it's not the most obvious creative combination, perhaps. Popmeister Rick Astley, edgy actor Simon Pegg and a film crew from Mission Impossible. But they have all got together to produce Rick's latest pop video.
This is Rick Astley as a screen hero who sorts things out. Not quite Tom Cruise, though it was one of his co-stars who dreamt up and directed the video, the collaboration born of mutual love.
I saw Rick at a festival and loved the show. It was a great gig. It was such a brilliant evening and the audience were just so up for it. And I Instagrammed a little picture of Rick just saying, this guy with a love heart. And then I think Rick saw that and
I fell in love.
I bet you've always wanted Rick Astley and Simon Pegg to team up and do something very special.
So with a new Rick Astley video on the cards, the singer asked the question.
I just presumed you had directed things, to be honest, in terms of
I've
like
only
some
done
of
a
the
few little things, nothing on this scale actually.
Right,
so.
well, never mind this scale. I thought you might have even directed some of the movies. So I was completely blown away when you said yes, so.
Pegg is part of the cast of the Tom Cruise film franchise Mission Impossible, and with the actors' strike of more than 3 months halting filming on the follow-up to this year's outing, he had the time.
Considering you shot your last video on a mobile phone with your wife shooting,
yeah,
it's a little bit of an upscale from that.
Yeah, that was a little bit intimidating actually, because you're kind of thinking, okay, because obviously we've all seen the scale of the things that you do and all that, and you just think, oh right.
I'd just been working on Mission Impossible and everybody was quiet because of the strike, so I called up a lot of my Mission Impossible friends on the crew and said, hey, do you fancy coming and doing this? So we had this Hollywood movie crew.
Had you been back on set making Mission Impossible the 8th instalment, you obviously wouldn't have been available for this, would you?
No, I know, it was a complete stroke of luck. I mean, you know, obviously the strike was arduous for many people, but this came up and it just was a breath of fresh air. I absolutely jumped at the chance just because I just wanted to work.
Do you know when you're back on set?
Next year. I mean, the gears are going back into action now and we'll be back on set by January, I think.
Surely there's a part for this man.
Absolutely. Special Agent Rick.
in the tea and coffee department, I think.
After his Hollywood treatment, Rick Astley is clearly in no hurry to return back down to earth. Nina Nanar, News at 10.
Great place to end, but that's all we've got time for. Good night. Thank you for watching.
With tensions at